Thanks everyone for chiming in and joining us this evening for our final Fireside Chat of the season. So those of you that don't know me, my name is Meg. I'm the Education Director for the Friends of the Flathead Avalanche Center. And Sara Boilen, of course, our moderator. And tonight, Cam is joining us as our forecaster. And he's going to get us started with our current state of the snowpack and what is going on for us here in Northwest Montana in this second week of March as we're entering into spring as of yesterday. So,
and we should say, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A as we go along. That didn't work. Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so for the current state of the snowpack, I figured it'd be important for us to look backward for a second before we try to look ahead. And this is looking back all the way to the beginning of the month. End of February, we had that big atmospheric river where we got that 6 inches of water and we had impressive avalanche cycles. So we had this huge dry slab, soft slab cycle. And then following that, it rained up past 7,000 feet and we got these giant piles of wet debris that ran over. So if you've been out traveling, especially around in the Middle Fork the past, couple weeks, I'm sure you've seen some of these giant debris piles. So we went from that, high danger, and then we got a couple inches of snow after we got really cold temperatures. So we went from this big avalanche cycle down to where the snow surface, that wet surface, froze and locked up and got a few inches of snow. And so this was taken first week of March, I believe, in the Swan Range. And so that snow sat on that crust and we really got two different layers of near surface faceting that happened. One just above the crust and then another one a little bit further up. And, different heights, this layer formed at the top of that crystal card that you can see there in the screen. So we really have two different problem childs that are doing better now than they were a little bit ago. So it snowed on that weak layer and we got a lot of immediate direct action off of that. And so this was our new persistent slab that we're dealing with now. This was right after a loading event about a week ago, I think. And this was where people were getting remotely triggered avalanches. And I thought that this problem was going to stick around a lot longer than it has been. Everything right now that we've been seeing is that it's on a definite trend towards, stabilizing, gaining strength. I think a lot of that contributed to pretty mild and fairly warm temperatures the last week. And that weak layer is fairly close to the surface. So it helped those grains to strengthen pretty quickly. So that's where we're kind of sitting right now is we have this persistent weak layer. It's gaining strength. We dropped the danger to low because of that, it was unlikely to trigger. And now we're looking ahead, kind of moving forward. And so this is a graph or a model, and what all these lines mean. We'll just start with all the squiggly lines. So all those squiggly lines are different weather models that are predicting precipitation, and the bottom one is snow accumulation. And so the top is precipitation, so water. And all those lines are different models. And then the darker lines, the dark red, green, and the dotted ones, those are the averages. So, this is public. It's on the University of Utah website, obviously. But the closer those lines are together, the more confidence there is. There's less variation between models, or they agree more. So it's more likely that's what we're going to see. So really, we're not looking at a lot of precipitation for the next week-ish, a half inch of water, and looking down lower in those lines, not even 5 inches of snow, which is also saying it's pretty warm and pretty wet. Or not real wet, but it's not going to really snow a whole lot. It trades to a few inches of snow to the 28th. So that's for precipitation, not a whole lot going on. And then the biggest change that we're going to be seeing, really starting this afternoon and looking forward, is the temperatures. So this could be a pretty confusing graph at first. However, if you just draw your eyes to where those colors that run along the graph where they go from green to blue, that is the freezing line. And on the left, which you might be hard to see, is millibars, which we can translate into elevation bands. And that freezing line goes up past 800 millibars, which is roughly 6,000 feet, and almost touches 700. So even if we say it's 750, that's pushing 8,000 feet our freezing levels are going to be at. And there's really not much of, it really doesn't let off for, the next handful of days, and who knows really what beyond that right now. So looking at high freezing levels, so warm temperatures, and I think this is going to be a big transition into spring-like conditions. So be prepared for, we haven't listed cornice fall yet, but that was something that was on my mind the other day looking at this. So might be seeing cornice falls, different wet snow avalanches. With consecutive nights of no refreeze, there's always room for some pretty funny business to happen. So wet loose, I'd say, we'll very likely see those. Wet slab, don't really see unless something starts happening on this new persistent weak layer, but not really seeing a setup for that. Might start to see some glide cracks showing their frowns pretty soon. But that's really what we're kind of looking at moving forward. Unfortunately, with nights and no refreeze, it doesn't offer a big, real window to get out in the morning and kind of beat the point where things become unstable. So the biggest thing going out, if this, these temperatures do show what they're forecasting, is really just pay attention to surface conditions and the supportability of the surface snow. And that's mostly kind of all I got for the state of the snowpack and a little glimpse of what we might be looking at ahead.
Can you add at all about like how much snow? I feel like it's been brown a lot down low this winter, and like heading into spring, like how's our snowpack in terms of depth up high?
I looked at a few of the snow tells them where they were at percentage, and just looking at their snow water equivalent. And Stall the other day was at like 120% of average. And then most of the others, so since that storm in the beginning of the month, that bumped us up, that helped us a whole lot with the snowpack height and our water. And so most stations are at average or near an average or just above.
Cool.
Yeah. And, one thing with this heat that I'll add is, with that atmospheric river we had, it was really warm. However, it still was snowing. It seemed like the rain snow line was roughly around 7,200-ish feet. Still finding where that crust is. So, if it gets warm and stays warm up around 8,000 feet is, that'll be kind of the first time that upper elevation snowpack sees that much heat. So kind of be paying attention to that as well, how things unfold.
Cool. Thanks, Cam.
Yeah.
I remember like sitting in our first one with Blaze, and we were like, we had no layer. It was like such a nice December, right?
Oh yeah. Have at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah, sure. And introduce what we're doing. You want to say it, or I should say it?
Either one. I think, as most of you know, being avalanche educators, this incident happened, a week after our last Fireside Chat. I think I need to start first by saying a huge thank you to Maggie and Paul and Burkett, because I now realize slightly how terrifying this is. We found ourselves in a sticky situation, and it just, even with working as hard to like make the smart decisions, things happen. And so again, that's why we're here. We're here to talk about it. We really appreciate just this community that has kind of been built around this idea. So it just kind of felt fitting that you got us for the last Fireside Chat.
Yeah, as soon as we like found ourselves in that pickle, I feel like it was pretty quick. We were like, oh, we're gonna have to do the Fireside Chat. Because we've spent, time recruiting folks to talk about things. And yeah, it was pretty clear, like, oh, this is gonna be us.
Mhm.
Great. So without further ado, I think the piece, how I'm hoping to sort of tie all this together tonight for everybody is that, I've been teaching the human factor stuff for several years. And one of the suggestions I often give is like debrief, like make sure you're debriefing. And I think as soon as it came time for like a serious debrief about a serious thing, I was like, oh, I actually don't really know how to debrief. And so I thought it'd be helpful to kind of just like give an overview of like how you actually debrief. And then since I'm usually the moderator, and that would be real awkward for Meg if I just like moderated her in a thing that happened with me, we're just gonna kind of debrief our incident, which we've obviously already done. So hopefully it doesn't feel like too canned, but we just want to give everybody an opportunity to sort of have that perspective on like, how do you talk about hard things in your group? So, and again, if you have questions, feel free to chime in over there in the chat or the Q&A. So, just really quick from like a brain science perspective, because I can't help but talk about that. Our memories are basically the thing that informs our decision-making in the future. So if, how things have happened in the past is your brain's best way of predicting what happens in the future. And one of the things, so memory is actually made up of 4 different things. It's made up of identifying what to focus on and remember, encoding that information. So putting it in your brain for safekeeping, storing it, and then retrieving it. And things can go wrong at any steps of the way, but the first one is kind of what I want to focus on, because if we haven't identified like what's important to remember here, it's really possible that you neglect stuff. So this is like the essence of type 2 fun, right? Which is that like you go and you have this really hard day, and then at the end when you're like celebrating, you're like, that was so awesome. And then the next time when you think back to that day, you're like, that was so awesome. So unless we debrief and unless we talk about how things actually went, we may distort how things were. And I think it's really important that we learn from our mistakes and we learn from other people's mistakes. And hopefully that's a bit of what we're doing tonight. And then additionally, Meg and I go out together a lot and have been for a number of years. And it also feels important that like we learn how to do things better. And so by talking about it and being like, oh, that's what was going on for you, like, oh, okay, then we can like understand each other better. So if these are regular partners, like obviously it's super important to kind of discuss, and I think we'll get into that a little bit tonight. So there's kind of 2 goals of a debrief, and this comes actually out of like aviation incidents, which unfortunately there was a plane crash in China yesterday, I believe. And so this is like what we know from that industry is basically like what actually happened today versus what was predicted to happen, or what did we expect would happen, and then how did we make decisions and what's our plan for next time. So those are kind of the 2 pieces. And if you have like an ARI book because you've taken an ARI course, this is actually written right in there, but it's sort of important to sort of like go through and be like, how did it actually unfold? And that's kind of relevant today too. So in terms of how to structure, like it should actually be part of every trip. And I think often my debriefs tend to be like, that was awesome, let's do it again soon. And I know like at the Avalanche Center, right, you probably have like a formal debrief that you have to use. And so having some standard format makes it easier than just like, what was your favorite part? Which is what I'd love to ask. You want to do it immediately if possible, because we're already encoding those memories. So we actually stopped at the bottom of the slope. Like once we were all safe, we regrouped, we had a snack, and we kind of talked about things. And then we talked about things again later when we were all like safe and calm and everything. And then an important kind of rule is just to like talk about what happened, like not what people did or talking about the people, like saying like, oh, it took us longer to cross that slope than we thought, not, wow, you were really slow today, right? It's like not super helpful. So, in theory, you're making a plan and you're checking the forecast, and then you want to know, like, how did it go? Like, did the weather forecast hold up? Did the avalanche forecast hold up? What were we surprised by? Did we follow our plan? Did we deviate from it? And if we deviated, like why and how? And then I think it's important to talk about like what were our checkpoints? Like where did we make decisions? And we're going to get into that as well. Just giving spoiler alerts. So, and then of course, if something goes wrong, like you want to kind of hear from every person. I think one of the things that's really interesting in our incident is that everybody had very different perspectives, literally, like we were on different parts of the slope. Everybody saw something different. And if we weren't able to like pull all that information together, like we wouldn't quite know exactly what went on. So do you want to add anything to I just kind of blew right through that, huh?
Yeah.
All right. So let's start here. So this was Sunday, February 20th. And we had considerable up high, moderate, in that mid band. And I think our elevation was kind of like right at the cusp of these two.
Yep.
If everybody remembers, because I feel like this was kind of a memorable storm, and you could probably speak to actually better what you remember, because you were out there the day before.
I do recall it overproducing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So do you guys want to talk about, so we chose to go to Mount Marston, and partially because you guys had just been there the day before. Or
not the day before,
two
but
days.
no,
sometime
like
that week
or so.
It was a
Okay.
week before.
Yeah.
But it was my first time there, and it was a clear day. It was a really nice day. And I was just looking around, getting excited. I was like, there's a ton of terrain here. Like, this is pretty cool. So I already had in my head that like, I want to come back to this zone. I want to spend some time poking around. And, Cam and I skied a couple runs on some steeper stuff after kind of establishing that it was pretty good conditions to ski some steeper slopes. And so I got to just, very minimal, like know a little bit of the terrain. And so, yeah, then when we were there, it was dumping the whole time. We couldn't see anything. So again, sticking to what after looking at the maps and I might be getting ahead of myself as far as like what went wrong and how we got ourselves in that predicament. But just kind of thinking based on what Cam and I skied that we were sticking to, kind of still some safer terrain, but we pulled out the map a second time after studying it pretty significantly and making sure we were avoiding steep terrain. That's kind of where we got in trouble.
Yeah. So maybe we can give a little bit of an overview, which is that, so there were 4 of us in the group, and I have skied with everybody in the group, but one of the group members was new to 2 of the group members. And, I think we all kind of have a similar mindset of like enjoying dad pal. Like none of us are really looking to get rad, especially when there's like fresh snow and there's really no reason to get rad. So we kind of went up there with the intention of like going to a cool new zone, maybe poking around, seeing what we could ski and having a good time. And so we snowmobiled up to the spot in the road where like it had been wind drifted, and was like, okay, this is clearly our stopping zone. And couple things just leading up to it. We had talked the night before. I had gotten a new phone recently, and when I downloaded the Gaia app, I didn't quite realize you had to like download every map itself, So when I was driving north near Olney, I realized that I couldn't load the map. So I had no map, and actually Meg was the only one who had the map downloaded on her phone, which I think was definitely an issue. It was also an issue because it was dumping. So Meg would pull out her phone, and before she could even like pass it off, it was like covered in snow and you couldn't really see. And the winds were whipping pretty good. So we kind of skinned up this ridge and we decided like, yeah, let's go all the way to Lookout. Not because we necessarily needed to ski right off the Lookout, but just for fun. Like most of us had never been there and it seemed like a good destination. And we had this intention, having looked at the map, of kind of skiing off to the left off the ridge. And as soon as we like, you know, transitioned and looked, we were like, wow, that is a really thick forest. Like real thick. And one member of our party like went down to kind of suss it out and just yelled back like, no way, you know, like I think he kind of had to like sidestep out of it. I mean, he traversed for a long ways. We were like, okay, we'll just go down further down the ridge and you can jump in at any point. But I feel like we had looked at the map like in that zone. And actually I can skip ahead to, oops. So I don't think I have a way of laser pointering, but that'd be cool. I'm sure there's a way, but this black line is essentially the line that we were kind of looking at skiing. And so obviously some like micro terrain features that we would be concerned about, but in general, the line's not like perfectly drawn on there, but that whole upper section was just so thick. We just kept kind of poking our way down that ridge and then eventually skied that purple line and got to the road. And I think for, at least for my thinking, you can speak to yours, I think I was like picturing that black line. Like I was just picturing this kind of like continuous run. Like even though we were hitting a road, like our run was still lower and we had agreed like we would skin down there and then skin back up, or ski down and skin back up. And we never took out the map.
Yep. Yeah, we stood at that road. We had a good ski to that point. We were like, that was fun. And then
it's like very mellow.
Yeah, as you can see, like if you're on the road, you're looking down, you cannot see that
it's about to happen.
Yeah, and that it was a pretty huge convexity that we were all unaware of until we skied it.
Yeah. So we were skiing in pairs above the road, and then we continued that below the road, which looking back, I think we all agreed we would have skied it one at a time, if at all. I actually think probably none of us would have skied it if we had really realized.
Yeah.
And my partner triggered the slide, and I was sort of in the middle of the slope, and he was kind of off to the right, and just it propagated way bigger than I think we had imagined was possible. I guess we should have talked about some of the tests we had kind of done on our way up the ridge, but and it was a very slow moving slide. It was like kind of like lava, and it was enough to kind of like make it so I didn't know if I could like turn and still stay upright. And so I just sort of like side slope, you know, side skied down the slope. And there was this big tree, like a huge snag with no branches right in the middle, like right below me. And I was like, I'll just head for that. Like that looks like a great stopping place. And then I can reassess. And my buddy had kind of skied off to the right. And at that point, you guys were above and to skiers right of us, or he had skied left. You guys were right of us.
Yes.
And I kind of like tweaked my knee a little bit and was like, okay, I think I'm okay, but still feeling like, wow, like, are we safe? Like, what's going on here? And then quickly realizing like, you guys maybe weren't safe. So yeah, if you want to speak from there.
Yeah, so I was actually out of view of Sara, and my partner was able to see Sara, could kind of see that something had happened, saw her hanging onto a tree. And I heard him kind of yell to Sara, like, are you okay? And I was kind of like, what's going on? Also realizing I had seen a little bit of movement in the snow at that point, but looking down, I realized like I was right on that convexity. And so we just kind of waited to kind of get verbal, and we did have radios. So we were kind of both like able to talk to each other, but also use the radio communication, and just kind of decided what was going to be the best option as far as where to ski, where to get everyone to a safe spot. So my partner and I, and it's my husband, he's well aware that everyone's going to know it's him. So he and I ended up kind of not watching, traversing, the opposite direction, which in hindsight also maybe was not the best decision. But I think we were concerned that we were still above Sara and her partner at that time. So, but we just kind of traversed, and we were getting some snow to move. Nothing overly concerning, but at the same time, just being really aware. And at that point, we definitely skied one at a time and kept eyes on each other.
And I feel like in this picture, you can actually see Tim up in the upper right corner.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see how he's like on this rib, and he's literally right at the edge of where it went. So, yeah. And then you were further above him.
I was above him.
Yeah. And so my buddy and I skied the bed service kind of out, and then you guys traversed, and it was a little harrowing, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we had like, I feel like we had like dry loose above,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, I think that's part of what maybe was slow motion in my brain. Like it took a minute to figure out that it was like not just dry loose. And yeah, and then I think it took a minute for all of us to sort of figure out, how do we get out of here,
Yeah.
So maybe just a couple other things. We had gone to the Whitefish range that day. So this is on our way up, and you can just see, it was snowing. And I think that was maybe part of the other thing, is like we all kind of had like hoods up, like it's windy, there's like not a ton of talking. One other piece that I'll kind of mention is Meg and Tim were like ambitiously early that day, because you guys in the canyon thought the roads were really bad, and then the roads were no longer bad, so you like made good time getting across the valley. So these guys were waiting for us at the trailhead for a good like 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe not so much. Yeah. In my mind, you guys have been waiting 2 hours. And I'm kind of like a slower snowmobiler. And I think I had like a little bit of a racing mindset in that day of just being like, oh my gosh, I've kept these guys waiting. Like nobody likes to be sitting at the trailhead waiting for the excitement of the day. And I think just that was relevant for me, of maybe partially why I didn't say like, hey, I think we should slow down. And so just going back to this, I think in terms of the output from the storm, so it snowed more than we anticipated, and it actually snowed more in the Whitefish range than was predicted. I think the Middle Fork was supposed to get the brunt of the snow, or like South Glacier, Middle Fork, and the Whitefish range really got a ton of snow, so much so that Tim was in front on the way out, but he said the snowmobile track was like fully filled in.
It was. Yeah.
Like when we hit the road later, skimmed back up to the road, I was like, wait, our snowmobiles are up there, so that means we snowmobiled this? And it was like impossible to tell that we had been there. And maybe a couple other things. So this was high up on the ridge. We were kind of noticing some slabs, which we were interpreting as wind slabs, which I think they were. But again, we sort of had this like bit of data, and we were like, we're skiing these sheltered trees down low. Like this is not relevant for us. And so even though we had this like bullseye sort of data, so to speak, or red flags, it didn't really register, I think. And again, we just really didn't know what we were getting into. So,
and there's definitely, it was the first storm following a pretty significant dry spell. And so, I'm not going to lie that was also exciting, that we were like, it's still saying snow. And so there's a level of like, yeah, like this is great snow.
And it was great.
It was great snow. Yeah. So,
yeah. So I think it's helpful to just come back to this. Were you going to say something?
I've got a couple questions that come up, and one of them I think, or I guess a thought and a question, and something that just clicked in my head, that you were just talking that you saw these red flags and then they didn't register. I remember listening to a presentation on decision making once, and it was about errors of ineptitude and errors of ignorance. And so like errors of ineptitude to be like, the technical, but you go anyway. And errors of ignorance would be like, you don't know the technical. So where do y'all feel that do you feel like you fell into one of those categories with that?
Yeah.
Because it seemed pretty clear. It's like, oh, there's a problem. And then.
Yeah, I think we thought we were managing the problem.
Right.
Yeah. So I really think it wasn't an error of technical. Like I think we knew, and we were like, oh, that's why we're skiing this line. Yeah. It was just like
going into the sheltered trees.
Yeah. We were like, we're not skiing right here. We're not skiing anything steep off the ridge. We felt the wind. Like we all were like pulling our coats up on one side, like protect our face. Like the wind was so obvious. So was the falling snow, but like the wind slabs were pretty obvious. And it's interesting, in the forecast, Dundas talked about, he's like, we don't usually do wind slab and storm slab on the same day, but today it seems reasonable. Yeah. And I think for me, it was much more about like anchoring to that wind slab idea. Like I was like, oh, it's a wind slab. Well, with sheltered trees, like that's the answer. And like kind of forgetting like storm slab, and also like, let's check the map again. Like, let's make sure we are going where we think we're going, Yeah,
that's a great point.
Yeah.
And then kind of going all the way back to your trip plan. Because I've fallen into this a number of times with places that I've gone to before, is to not look at the map, and then I miss subtle changes. And one now for me that stood out was like a subtle aspect change, and I thought I was managing an aspect, and we blew it. So do you feel like, in actually like looking back at your trip plan from that morning or the night before, that you spent time with the map just by being there the week before? You feel like the whole group, like, as a whole, spent enough time on the map, or is it kind of like, been in the spot, let's go?
I definitely had it pulled up on the computer at home because I wanted to show Tim, and so we were looking at it. I don't know if you looked at it on the computer.
I looked at it on the computer.
Yeah. So yeah, we were kind of, and again, like, didn't know what to expect. Again, didn't think it was going to be snowing that hard. I was hoping to have like more visual of some of that terrain, which we didn't have. So yeah.
So you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think probably for me, and it's so funny, like I say this in like the Abby classes, I'm like, the pre-mortem analysis, like my headline is always like, avalanche educators make stupid decision, and I was like, oh, there's the headline,
I think of that all the time.
But I think like the piece that feels most relevant was like, we didn't close any terrain. Like I never looked at the map and said like, we're not going there, And I think if I had done that, I would have been more conscious to be like, hey, let's pull out the map again. And let's like, look at this. Cause we said we weren't gonna, like I can think of that one time we were skiing off the reservoir, and Tim and Jeff were like chatting about this North Bowl they were looking at. And I was like, the problem today is on the north face. Like, we're not going on the north side today, right, everybody? And everybody was like, oh yeah, we're talking about next time. And I was like, okay, good, glad we're clear. But I felt so clear that day, like we weren't skiing north facing stuff, because that's where the problem was. Whereas this, I think we had a little more of a poke around mentality, which is maybe appropriate for a different day, maybe not like a storm day mentality.
Yeah,
for sure. Like, I was saying this earlier, like, I don't think our mentality was like stepping it out.
Oh yeah.
This, like, stop this.
Yeah.
Now you can see us. I don't think
Back to talking heads.
we like kind of went into it being like, let's get gnarly, like, let's step it out. I think we all went expecting to ski Dad Pow, and we just didn't.
Yeah.
So what do you think we could have done better? I guess that would be like the next kind of step.
I think, again, like, one of the biggest things for me is just pulling the map back out at that road cut. And then, communication at that point, once the the slide had been triggered and you were kind of like in the middle of it. Communication of the best way for all of us to ski safely down at that point was, I think at that point it, excitement got involved, and there are emotions, and just kind of like, there's some people are scared, and so I think that got a little lost for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that last part. I think I would have liked to have asked the question, like, where is everybody?
Mhm.
Like just starting there. Like, I didn't know I knew where Tim was. I knew where Aaron was. I didn't know where you were,
Mhm.
and I think having a sense of that, and even seeing, there was so much snow, and, like seeing Tim wasn't like, it's not like we could have like a casual conversation,
Sure.
right? We were like yelling at each other. And I think just like pausing and, kind of like taking stock, so to speak, I think would have been really helpful. And for everybody to just kind of say like, here's where I am and here's what I see.
Yeah.
Because I think as long as we weren't moving, like the threat was diminished significantly. But it was like unnerving to be like, well, I don't, like, are they above, like what's potential here? Yeah. And I, we talked about this, and I talked about how like that mentality that I sometimes have of like, I don't like people having to wait for me, is like something I have to reckon with a little more of like, and I think even just naming in our group and having Tim be like, I don't care, I'm having a great time. And like having to hear his voice in my head next time, like, because he's faster than me. He's faster at snowboarding, faster at skinning, faster at laughing, faster at eating, like all these things. I'm like,
It's fast.
Yeah, he's a fast guy. And I just have to be like, cool. And he also doesn't mind waiting. And that's why he's out here with me, and like really shifting that mentality so that I don't feel hasty.
Yeah.
And since then I've downloaded like every map that I have on Gaia.
Yeah.
So I'm like, wherever I go, because that was like a thing. I was like, oh, I've been there before. Oh, I have the map. Don't even check it. My phone's so tiny, I just use the computer at home.
Yeah.
So, yeah. There's a question, where was our approach to get to the ridge, I presume?
Yeah. So the approach was right along the ridge. We skinned up the road. Do we want to pull up the map?
Yeah,
we can kind of show that.
Now that I'm so fast at this. There we go.
So yeah, I mean,
so where did we park?
We parked our snowmobiles
right
probably like right about here.
And you see the pointer?
I'm sure they can.
Okay.
Where'd it go? So we parked our snowmobiles right about here. We skinned up the road to about here, and then kind of right at this nose, we just kind of went up the ridge all the way to the lookout. And, like we sat here and we looked at this, it's like on a real safe day, like that's a beautiful looking slope. We knew 100% we were not skiing that, but it's pretty appetizing. So again, like Sarah mentioned early on, this was kind of the initial thought, but it was super just heavily treed right up here. So, yeah. And then after we kind of skied down and regrouped down here, kind of in this flat zone, we ended up kind of skinning all the way around, and we did pull the map out quite a bit as we kind of poked our way through and got back to the road.
Yeah, and there's a lot of micro terrain features that were, and there's that, we've shared it in this Fireside Chat before, but there's that great article about CalTopo and the micro terrain. And so we really picked our way through that, kind of what was initially supposed to be our ski line. Yeah. I think just going back kind of to here for a second, I think that, it's interesting, right? It was a considerable day up high. It was a moderate day in the mid zone. And I think maybe that factored into some of my thinking, and also having that mindset of like, we're going to a zone that got less snow overnight and is producing less snow during the day. And yeah, I just keep coming back to that anchoring bias, and that like I was just like anchored to information that like clearly was not relevant anymore,
Mhm.
and we all spent a lot of time just like admiring our snowmobiles when we got back to them, because we were like kind of blown away at how much snow. And we even talked about how, because it took us a while to pick our way out of that skin back up to the road. And we even remarked like, wow, if we had skied that line even an hour or two later, like the slide could have been more consequential, because it was falling so fast. So you talk about your goals for the day and have open close run plan before you left the trailhead? So no, we didn't. I think we did talk about our goals, you and I, on the skin track, and how our goals are like to ski fun, dad pow, and have a good time. But we didn't talk about what was open and closed. And I think in part, there was a little bit of that, like I deferred to you because I was like, oh, Meg's been there recently and has some ideas. And I think it would have been a way better plan to like look at the map indoors.
Yeah.
Learn that lesson.
Yep, for sure.
And really take time to be like, where are we not going? And if this happens, what about this? I think that, again, these are all things that I teach. I don't know if there's anybody on this call who has been in one of my classes, but you've like heard me preach all this stuff.
Yeah.
And here I am.
Here we are.
Look at that.
Yep.
So it can happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? I can stop this again.
Yeah, I think just as far as thoughts, I really kind of just want to reiterate that I'm super appreciative to just kind of have this avenue and this venue to kind of like share experiences, and I hope that it's valuable to everyone. It has been for me, and to be able to kind of again listen to our first fireside chat with Maggie and Paul, and then last month with Burkett, like there's value in learning from each other, and each of these instances, these have been individuals that have a good amount of avalanche training, and so it's just, I think if anything, it helps kind of bring us all kind of back down to earth and just reevaluate. And that's certainly kind of been my thought process since then, going into the backcountry, and will 100% continue to be, because there were a lot of steps missed, like the question about our trip plan and about our open versus closed terrain, like those plans were not in place and those discussions were not had. So that's a big takeaway for me, and I think for the group in general.
Yeah, I think if we had that conversation, we actually probably would have stuck to a very different line.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just would have skied something totally different, because it was like, oh man, there's some micro terrain features, or oh, we don't want to, like, we're just not going below the road, like why risk it? Yeah. So I think kind of takeaways were like being clear early on about our plan, and creating that framework of like, here's what we're willing to do, here's what we're not willing to do, here's how it's going to go down, here's where we're going to make that decision. And then I think having like a choice point, like, okay, when we get to the road, like let's regroup and like talk about how things are looking. Yeah, I think for me, I learned a lot about just like communicating more and not being so worried about like, oh, I'm slow, so I don't want to like ask some question that's going to then slow down the group, and then yeah, I think additionally like that communication piece of like if something happens. I remember I took a class like many years ago. It was crevasse rescue, and we were like talking about avalanches, and the guide said, if you're buried, she's like, you get one scream and then you need to like save your breath, she's like, but I understand you're gonna be freaked out, you get one scream in there. And it was not like maybe the most helpful information I've ever received, but it was so helpful because it got me actually imagining what it would be like to be buried in the snow, and like what might be going through your head and what that might feel like and be like and what you might need to do with that. And so I think this was really helpful for me in like imagining like, okay, here's the scenario. Like what do you do? How do you show up? And I think you can teach as much as you want, but like you're never gonna get it until then. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said, the things that it's something that you teach all the time. And then, here you are sitting. And I think just to reiterate, it's so hard, I feel like, to do it right every time. It's like, it's impossible to do it right every time. And there's so many factors. I feel like, one thing that for me that happens often and seems like maybe you felt like a time stress because it's like you're behind, which for, especially going out and doing field work, like feel like I'm always late. And there's that. And then it's like, well, you also have snowmobiles. So it's like, there's a whole nother, mental energy going towards a whole nother, like more equipment because you're going, sled access skiing. So you have more things to think about. And, this idea, the idea of having checklists to go through, it's like, if I don't have it, and, there was a time in the beginning of the winter, we didn't have our checklist in the truck. And honestly, it was like a lot of the conversation just wasn't happening because these checklists weren't there to remind us to have them. And, it's just, and from that going on a professional sense and then going out when I go recreationally, it's like, there's a lot of times where these, where you kind of cut corners and, I think just recognizing that it is hard to do them, but it can be easier having that sheet of paper, laminate in your truck or car or something to make you to at least think about the things, at least have them enter your brain first, just be like, oh, let's go up into this drainage and then just leave. So.
Yeah, I think it's really valid. Like, I think especially like with snowmobiling, you're like pulling the trailer, like making sure you have everything, like is everything strapped down? Like there's so much extra in your day that you have to think about. And that's like before you even get to the trailhead.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, I can barely remember to bring my snowmobile key, for example, let alone like, go through some mental checklist of, and I think that again, like, gosh, so then do it the night before, or like all of those things and setting yourself up for success and not leaving it to like, defaulting to not remembering those details or whatever. I think that's really important. Yeah, and I hope that's helpful for folks to hear. Even Cam has a hard time remembering what to talk about. His plan.
Yep. And to acknowledge that these things happen. Like if you spend enough time in the mountains, it happens. It definitely happens to me. It happened to y'all. It's like these things happen, and I learned from sitting here. Like you just mentioned that you learn from these like discussions, and it's our free lessons.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely got a free lesson. Well, great. Well, we'll leave you all to the rest of your evening. Thanks for popping over to be with us. And if you ever have a close call and you're looking for a spot to debrief, this couch is ready for you. In front of your, actually next year we'll be doing these live in person, right? Hopefully. Yeah. So great. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you all.
Good night.